The views, thoughts, and opinions expressed are the speaker's own and do not represent the views, thoughts, and opinions of Atlas Chiropractic Center of Escanaba, Michigan, Largent Media, or any of their affiliates or subsidiaries. The material and information presented in this podcast is for entertainment purposes only. Should you need medical attention or advice, seek out a licensed medical professional or facility in your area. The Tapping Into Uncomfortable with Reade Hubert DC name and all forms and abbreviations are the property of its owner, and its use does not imply endorsement of or opposition to any specific organization, product, or service.
Welcome to Tapping Into Uncomfortable, the podcast that takes the middle lane of the healthcare freeway. Sometimes we put our blinker on and pass in the left lane or pass in the right lane, but when we pass the issue, we roll down our window and scream, "The riff!" But podcast road rage is not good. It involves bad thoughts, which leads to trauma. Folks, the 4 T's are everywhere. You are fantastic and one of a kind, which leads me to this. I do not like the term following. If you follow this podcast, I'm going to call you a leader of this podcast because maybe, just maybe, you'll take care of yourself, your family, your friends, and that will start to change everything around you. So you, my friends, if you're listening to this program, are not a follower. You are a co-leader. So before we get started today, it is a very, very big day today. I always say big day, big podcast, but I do not like trigger warnings, but I'm going to tell you this. If you are not in a good mood, do not listen to this podcast. You put it aside for later because this is stuff that we need to discuss. So what are we going to talk about today? Today on the unprocessed menu on Tapping Into Uncomfortable is number 1, environmental prescriptionism. Number 2, vaccination stuff. Number 3, the Q&A. Can the toxin, the bacteria, virus stand on its own? And then we're going to ask the new question. So let's tear it up.
Welcome to Big Harm's Bait Dispensary. What can I get ya?
Yeah, is Big Harm around?
Yeah, let me get him.
Thank you. Hey, Harmon, how are you?
Doing okay. How's Roger?
Lazy. He sent me in for bait and the fishing report. How's the bite?
Well, the bluegill are depressed. They're staying on their beds and not defending the minnows. The sunfish are not so sunny, and the smallmouth bass are swimming in circles and won't come out from under the lily pads. The crayfish think they're indestructible. Instead of hiding, they're trying to fight the largemouth bass, and their numbers are dropping.
Okay. In that case, can you give me a dozen night crawlers and a dozen minnows?
Peggy, you might want to try our extended release antidepressant worms and our anti-anxiety minnows. For the larger fish, they're having great luck with our new GLP-1 release lures.
Okay, I'll take a dozen of each and 2 lures, please.
Peggy, you didn't hear this from me, but the bite has been great all day using meth and cocaine. But we don't sell that because it's illegal and bad. Will that be cash or insurance?
You have been warned.
Folks, today we're really going to live up to our motto at Tapping Into Uncomfortable University, and that is thoughts, toxins, trauma, and traits. We're all connected. Isn't that great? This is going to be a little difficult because I call this environmental prescriptionism. If you really sit back and you think about where do billions or over $1 billion of U.S. prescriptions go? How about in the world? How many total prescriptions you actually think there are in a year? Now they figure there's 6 billion. Of those 6 billion, they actually calculated what they think would be the daily doses. So if you had to take a medication 3 times a day, that kind of thing, that it's over 3 trillion daily doses in a full year. So my question for you is, where do those drugs go? Your body does a great job on doing what? Getting rid of them. Sometimes it can chemically change them, but its ultimate goal is use what's got to be used and get rid of them. So if your body excretes them, where do they go? Have you ever sat and thought about that? Because if they're intact and your body's getting rid of them, essentially what's happening is they're ending up in the environment. And where they're ending up is in our water supply, from the Great Lakes to the oceans to the rivers. Now check this out. In 2022, 258 rivers were checked in 104 countries. Drugs in those rivers, the majority of them actually were above, some of the drugs were above a safety threshold limit. Now, there's that threshold limit. In other words, you're allowed to have X amount of antibiotics in your river. You're allowed to have all these medications. But what's absolutely fascinating about this is there was 3 major culprits in the majority of those rivers. Number 1 was caffeine. Think about that. You take all that into your body. Look at our diet. Look at our drinks, correct? Look at our coffee. We flush that out, and that's where it ends up. But another fascinating statistic, another drug that was found consistently more in those rivers was one for diabetes type 2. So besides hurting yourself, we're putting this into the environment. Now, what's fascinating about that one is another drug that was in high amounts in that too is a drug that's treated for anti-seizures, or it has a lot to do with nerve pain. So it's directly following diabetes type 2 people for decreasing their nerve pain to make them more comfortable. Do you see thoughts, toxins, trauma, traits? We're all connected. Isn't that great? So once again, what is a safe level in our drinking water? We can only monitor this. We can't remove it. And when it gets into our water supplies, where do you think it's going? Do you think it's just sitting there? No, it's getting into the food chain. It's getting into the food web that the bottom feeders are getting it. They're then getting eaten by small fish, which then are getting eaten by big fish. And our fish are now becoming full of this. So essentially what we're doing is we're microdosing our environment. When all this is said and done, a major recycling actually happens. Now what happens is your municipalities now take their water from these fresh water sources that we just flushed all this stuff out. Now we're sucking that back in and we're using that as our drinking water. So in our drinking water, I found this. But remember, as long as it's below the safe threshold, you're okay. See where I'm going with this? So what ends up happening is it's getting into our food supply also, so that you may be drinking some of this from the tap. You may be eating some of the fish out of the water or something else. So what are we going to do? Nothing. We don't have an answer. We do not have good scientific studies to actually show what does this do in our environment. Now, we do know that on a yearly basis, we, the world, have over 3 trillion doses going through our bodies, going out into the environment. We do know that federal drug back programs where people give up their drugs in their home over 14 years was almost 20 million pounds. And that was supposed to go to the landfill in the safe section. We don't know what this is causing. What's going to happen if we do the science and we do find out that this is potentially, even though it's below the threshold, for us humans, because we're much larger, what is it doing to the animals? What if this was oil? What if this was PFAS? What if this was heavy metals? What if this was a private industry flushing all this stuff out? We would be madder than heck. But what do? And where does this come from? It comes from us. It comes from many health centers, hospitals, farm runoff, because our animals get this stuff too. So we need medication. But what are we going to do if this is actually found to be an issue? You're going to find out in the last question and answer. The question is going to be, how do we do this? How do we get ourselves better and not hurt everything or everybody around us? Because remember, we don't know for sure. We know it's there. We don't know what it does. It looks like our bodies can handle it as we recycle it. But what about the crayfish? What about the smaller fish? What about the larger fish? Oh, silly me. I almost forgot. None of this includes over-the-counter medication or illegal drugs. What are we going to do? I don't know, but we're going to find out. All right, everybody. Part 2 is a really, really tough one. Today is very, very tough on everybody's brains today because this is stuff that we need to talk about. There is no answer. It is not to make you feel guilty, but you were warned. That doesn't mean because medications keep people alive. But can we do both? We will find out. So vaccine stuff is part 2 today. So what you need to remember from our previous podcast is 2 + 2 = 4, only if you choose. I am not here to change your choice on vaccinations. I hope and I pray that you make very wise, educated decisions because we're going to teach you something today that nobody's talked to you about. There's equations that give rise to this thing called R. The 0 is subscript, and it's called R naught, N-A-U-G-H-T. It's called the R subscript 0 naught number. What that means is that is the transmission potential of a given virus. We all just went through COVID-19, right? So the R naught number, roughly, I rounded these off easier because it's a mathematical concept that is not done properly, can really screw things up. The R naught number is what's the transmission? So COVID was a 1 to 2 R naught number. What that means is if you get COVID, you're potentially going to pass it to 1 or 2 people, who then are going to pass it to 1 or 2 people, who are then going to pass it to 1 or 2 people. Do you see that? That's amazing. That R naught number of 1 to 2 whatever started in China, within 3 years took over the globe with an R naught number of 1 to 2 range. Now, measles, that's what we're going to talk about. Measles is going to teach us a lesson, and it's going to teach us a lesson in multiplication. It is the most communicable disease right now that we have on the face of the planet. Check this out. So COVID, you saw what it got to do was 1 to 2. The R naught number of measles, are you ready, is 12 to 18. So I'm going to take the middle number of 15 just to do it. Now imagine that. You get measles or an unvaccinated child gets measles. That's why this thing can spread exponentially among the unvaccinated children. You can't put a cap on this with something that is raging at 12 to 18 or 15 that you get it, and now 15 people get it. Those 15 go to another 15. Those 15 go to another 15. That's why measles is dangerous. Here's a really, really tough thing. All vaccinations are medicines, and all medicines have risks, but so do diseases. Did you ever sit and think about that? If an unvaccinated child gets measles and dies, did they get it naturally? Because what's happening is everybody seems to think that it's okay to get things naturally because it'll really build your immune system and you'll have lifetime immunity. But nobody ever tells you that's if you survived. So that's what's fascinating about measles is how fast it can actually go. Now, it's going to die out eventually because it's going to run up to a wall of immunity, and that's how this is eventually going to die down. But unvaccinated children are at risk made by adults. So check this out. So let's talk about getting things naturally. If I could guarantee everybody could get things naturally and it really wasn't that bad and you had lifetime immunity, man, that would be so good and cool. You'd never have this issue of, do I vaccinate or not to vaccinate? Let's talk about the Epstein-Barr virus. What was amazing about the Epstein-Barr virus, up until a couple years ago in Sweden, Swedish researchers busted this wide open. So do you remember when you were kids and you ended up getting mono, also known as the kissing disease, that you would kiss people and you could spread Epstein-Barr virus, which would give you mononucleosis, which was a white blood cell. You had mono at 10 years old. You fought it off naturally at 10 years old. You had a really rough month. You got over it. It's behind you. You have immunity. Amazing, hey? Until Swedish researchers said, hey, folks, you need to start looking at something. So that same person at 10 who thought they were over are now 40. They got massively stressed out and they reactivated the Epstein-Barr virus that's been sitting in their body. And oh yeah, then it started destroying the myelin sheath, which is now called multiple sclerosis. But they got over it. You see how we have to be careful. An unbelievable, fascinating thing just came out called post-vaccination syndrome. And they should have never released that because of the fact that it is not good science. I don't even know why these researchers even released it. When you look at it, it was a study, and it's going to start to mislead people thinking that they're going to get post-vaccination syndrome. And last but not least, if you haven't seen this, there's been so much chaos in the world that I think this actually slipped by, because in early February, something absolutely remarkably fantastic actually happened. A Yale researcher took 9 individuals who had the exact same type of kidney cancer. What is really bad about cancer is it takes on your genetics, so that your cancerous tumor, even though it's kidney cancer, same as everybody else, yours is automatically different. So what they were able to do was to take some of the protein makeup and tell the body, hey, we're going to vaccinate you. When you see this and some of the cells that may be left over in the kidney, I want you to attack it. They vaccinated 9 individuals with their own specific vaccination that is actually made and designed for their body. 3 years later, all 9 of those people have no known cancer left. So my question for you is that vaccination okay? Alrighty, folks, so we're going to answer the question. And the question is this: can the germ theory stand on its own? No, it cannot. People don't like that, but scientifically, it's a theory. And what happens within science is anything that keeps being proven, like gravity, it goes from the theory of gravity to the law of gravity. In other words, that's it. It's 100% correct. The germ theory has been around well over 100 years. It's a theory. It should never be called that. It should actually be removed from the scientific realm, because it's not ever going to the germ law. Just because you get a virus or a bacteria does not mean you're going to get the sickness or disease. And you may think, well, of course not. You got so many different things. Socioeconomic status actually makes a difference. Your thoughts running down your body, trauma, other toxins leading to this. The bacteria and virus is by itself. It has a lot to do with it, but it's not the complete package of being the human being. So no, the germ theory does not stand on its own. There's much more to it. Alrighty, folks. The last question, as your brain has been completely melted, is medication in the environment the new forever chemicals? So, my friends, is medication in the environment the new forever chemicals? So, as always, I want you to be happy, I want you to be healthy, and I want you to just be. This whole podcast is based on a book. Be on the lookout for 4 T's to a Better You, a blueprint for identifying and addressing the 4 causes of sickness. You'll be able to buy it just about everywhere.